Known for his adrenaline-pumping roles in fast car movies, Paul Walker lived a life full of excitement and speed. With his charming smile and action-packed performances, he captured the hearts of audiences worldwide. But as his fame continued to rise, something went horribly wrong. But what caused this devastating accident? Join us as we journey through the extraordinary life of Paul Walker, from his humble beginnings to his horrifying last minutes. Paul Walker was born on September 12, 1973, in Glendale, California. He was the oldest of 5 children, growing up in the small town of Sunland. Paul's parents jump-started his acting career by getting him a role in a Pampers commercial when he was just 2 years old, and Paul would go on to act throughout his entire childhood, with small television roles until he was cast in his first movie, Monster in the Closet, at the age of 10. When young Paul wasn't acting, he discovered a passion for surfing. He realized that the money he made from acting could help him buy surfboards and cover travel expenses for surfing trips. And this made him decide to stick with acting long term. During his teen years, he spent his time acting, surfing, and having fun around Sunland. And it will not surprise you that he got a lot of attention from the ladies too. I mean, look at those eyes. Influenced by his dad, who was a big motorcycle lover, Paul would eventually own some dirt bikes and ATVs. But it was actually his grandpa George who turned him into a car guy. He always had a racing story to tell, and Paul always listened. Over time, Paul's interest expanded to include Japanese and European sports cars like GTRs and lightweight M3s. But initially, he started out as a muscle car guy and even tried his hand at modifying them. Maybe he wanted it a little too much, as Paul would later total his dad's Chevy a few blocks from their house. Although all the Walker kids acted at some point during their childhood, Paul was the only one who continued acting into adulthood. His confidence was a major advantage during auditions, and he always appeared extremely relaxed, almost as if he wasn't concerned about getting the part. He probably would have preferred to be surfing at those moments, but this laid-back attitude actually impressed the casting directors. Throughout the 90s, Paul's acting career picked up significantly. He appeared in several TV shows such as Charles in Charge, Who's the Boss, and The Young and the Restless. And his career truly took off in the late 90s with notable roles in the 1999 films She's All That and Varsity Blues. Then in 2000, the call came. Paul was cast in the most important movie of his career so far. No, not that one. Yet. He was cast in The Skulls, which was directed by a guy named Rob Cohen, and he and Paul formed a strong connection on set. Rob loved Paul's attitude and work ethic and filled him in on his next project. Rob said, "Hey, Paul, I think I got a movie for you that you might really dig." And Paul was like, "Oh yeah, what's it about?" Rob explained, "Fast cars, hot chicks, and you get a gun and you're an undercover cop." And Paul was instantly sold, responding, "Dude, I'm in." And the funny part is, he didn't even read the script before he said yes. That next movie was Redline, a thrilling heist story set in Southern California's street racing world, with an undercover detective twist. To prepare for his role, Paul fully immersed himself in the underground street racing scene, visiting late-night meets to witness the real-life action and learn firsthand how street racers operated. These were Paul's first steps into the world of tuning cars, and he loved it. A few months before the release of Redline, the studio changed the title to the one that we know today, The Fast and the Furious. At the time, investing $38 million in a car movie without any well-known actors would be a big risk for Universal Pictures. However, despite any doubts they might have had, Fast and the Furious turned out to be a huge success, earning $207 million on the $38 million budget. The original cast came back for the 2009 sequel, Fast and Furious, which turned the series into a worldwide hit. The fourth movie made $360 million, competing with big franchises like Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, and Marvel movies. But through it all, Paul was still Paul. Paul preferred a quieter life away from the spotlight. However, Vin Diesel mentioned in an interview with Men's Health that while some actors may not like to be called by the roles they play, Paul Walker absolutely loved it, Vin recalled. One time, we were going to some birthday party or something, and one of the guys called him Brian, and when we left and we were in the car, he said, "That's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing when people call me Brian." Vin said that moment always stuck with him because it showed how much pride Paul took in Brian. To him, it was a beautiful compliment. Much like the character he played in the Fast and Furious movies Brian O'Connor, Paul was drawn to high-speed cars. And by 2013, he had built up a collection of about 30 cars, some of which he owned together with his friend Roger Rodas. Paul Walker's dad remembers the last conversation with his son saying, "Promise me no more daredevil stuff. If you feel in your heart that you can do it, then by all means do it. But if your mind has doubts, then don't do it." I looked at him and said, "Will you promise me that? You know, promises are a very important thing here, Paul." I said, "Say okay," and Paul said okay. On November 30th, 2013, Paul Walker had planned to spend the day at home with his family. He was looking forward to buying a Christmas tree and decorating it that evening with his mother Cheryl and his 15-year-old daughter Meadow. Meadow had recently moved to Los Angeles to live with Paul after being raised in Hawaii by her mother, and Paul was just getting used to his new role as a full-time dad. Cheryl recalled that Paul was especially cheerful that Saturday morning. "We were having this good conversation and he'd forgotten about an event he had," she said. "He got a text and said, 'Oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be somewhere.'" And that was when Paul reportedly rushed out of the door to a charity event which was organized to help victims of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Known for being a philanthropist, Paul had founded the exclusively self-funded disaster relief charity Reach Out Worldwide after being inspired by the needs following the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. At around 3:25 p.m., Paul and his friend Roger Rodas left the charity event and approached a red 2005 Porsche Carrera GT. Excited, Paul suggested, "Hey, let's go for a drive." Roger agreed and took the driver's seat, with Paul hopping into the passenger side. The Porsche Carrera GT was known for its powerful engine and tricky handling, and they didn't drive far from the shop, just a few hundred yards, when the car proved too much to handle. Roger lost control as they were traveling at about 100 miles per hour. Both men were wearing seatbelts, but despite this safety precaution, this would turn out not enough to protect them. The car slammed into a curb, then skidded into a tree and a light post, which made the car spin around with the passenger side hitting another tree. The car then burst into flames. Those attending the charity event, including Roger's 8-year-old son, immediately came running. The little boy jumped over a fence and ran to the wreck, trying to get his father out. Paul Walker's friend Antonio Holmes described it as one of the most horrific crash scenes in Hollywood history. He recalled, "The car was engulfed in flames and there was nothing we could do. Paul and Roger were trapped. Employees and friends tried to help. We all tried. We went through several fire extinguishers. We really tried. But sadly, it was too late. Due to the intense flames, they had no choice but to stand back and watch Paul Walker's death unfold before their eyes. There was nothing they could do. Paul died at the age of 40. The first firefighters arrived less than 3 minutes after a 911 call alerted them to the crash. As soon as they saw the devastating scene, they quickly realized there were no survivors. The recordings from their call to the dispatch center include one of the first updates from the scene.
We have confirmed 2 DOA.
Reporting there were 2 fatalities and labeling the victims DOA, meaning dead on arrival. The responder on the scene also informed dispatch that it was a Code N incident, indicating that it was a significant event that needed to be handled carefully due to its potential news impact. Having clearly suffered, Paul's body was found in a pugilistic stance, a term used to describe a position where the body's muscles contract from the heat, pulling the limbs into a posture similar to a boxer's defensive stance. This phenomenon, as explained by the medical dictionary, is caused by high-temperature fires causing muscle stiffening and shortening. The horrific burn injuries left his skin so badly charred that he could only be identified through dental records, and his organs were too damaged to be considered for tissue donation. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department investigated the crash and determined that the speed of the car was a major factor. Initially, they estimated the Porsche was traveling between 80 and 93 miles per hour. However, a later coroner's report confirmed the speed was about 100 miles per hour, well over the local speed limit of 45 miles per hour. However, another important factor was suggested by his family and stunt experts, who theorized that road bumps might have contributed to the accident. Accident reconstruction experts explained that hitting reflective plastic markers at speeds approaching 90 miles per hour could cause a car to lose traction. similar to the experience of driving a sports car on ice. Ultimately, the official report stated, for an unknown reason, the driver lost control of the vehicle and the vehicle partially spun around and began to travel in a southeasterly direction. The vehicle then struck a sidewalk and the driver's side struck a tree and then a light post. The force of these collisions caused the vehicle to spin 180 degrees and it continued to travel in an easterly direction. The passenger side of the vehicle then struck a tree and it then burst into flames. In 2015, Paul Walker's heartbroken daughter Meadow filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Porsche, claiming that flaws in the car's design led to her father's death. She argued that her father was alive for 1 minute and 20 seconds after the crash, but was unable to escape because of his seatbelt. The lawsuit claimed that the fire didn't start until a minute after the crash, suggesting Paul had a chance to escape. However, it claimed that the seatbelt was so forceful that it broke his ribs and pelvis, making it impossible for him to get free. The lawsuit also pointed out that the car lacked proper door reinforcements and didn't use fuel lines that break free to prevent a fire in case of a crash. Meadow Walker's lawyer, Jeff Milam, stated, "The bottom line is that the Porsche Carrera GT is a dangerous car. It doesn't belong on the street, and we shouldn't be without Paul Walker or his friend Roger Rodas." However, Porsche defended itself, stating Paul knowingly and voluntarily assumed all risk, perils, and danger in respect to the use of the 2005 Carrera GT. Ultimately, a detailed investigation found no pre-existing conditions would have caused this collision, and the primary factors identified were worn-out tires and unsafe speed. They found out that at least 2 of the tires on the car were more than 9 years old. Both airbags deployed correctly and no evidence of alcohol or drugs was found. The LA coroner determined the cause of death to be combined effects of traumatic and thermal injuries. Paul Walker's autopsy revealed fractures in his left jawbone, collarbone, pelvis, ribs, and spine. But even more terrifying, bits of soot were found in Paul's windpipe, meaning he'd been alive and still breathing as the fire raged around him. Roger Rodas had rapidly died of severe blunt head, neck, and chest trauma. The impact of the crash was so intense that the top of his skull was fractured, gruesomely exposing his brain. Porsche claimed that the car had been abused and altered, as well as misused and improperly maintained. 4 years after the accident, Paul's daughter, who was 15 at the time of his death, settled her lawsuit against Porsche for $10.1 million. Meanwhile, the crash site quickly turned into a mecca for grieving fans to leave tributes for the late actor. While the area where the tragedy occurred is popular among street racers, police confirmed there was no evidence of a second car involved in the crash. When Paul Walker passed away, most of the filming for Furious 7 had already been completed, but his untimely death left many wondering how the movie would continue without him. In the final version released in cinemas in April 2015, they used repurposed archived footage from previous outtakes, while his brothers Cody and Caleb also helped by acting in some scenes, which were later replaced with CGI to feature Paul's face. The film's ending was subtly changed following the tragedy, with the last scenes showing Paul's character Brian and Dominic Toretto racing one last time before Brian drives off. Furious 7 shattered box office records upon its release, quickly reaching the $1 billion mark in just 17 days, and ultimately earning over $1.5 billion worldwide. After the release, Vin Diesel revealed that during a 2013 interview shortly before Paul's death, he asked him about the number of Fast and Furious films he ultimately wanted to make. After thinking it over for a bit, Vin Diesel told him 10. He shared, "And I remember this giant smile on his face, like, what? That's impossible." But later that night we were talking and I promised Paul that we would get to that point. So I'd like to, hopefully, if it's meant to be, honor that. And he did. Fast 10 got released in 2023, and by achieving this milestone, the movie stands as another tribute to Paul Walker. Fast 10 includes flashbacks from the 2011 movie Fast 5, featuring Paul as Brian, which helps keep his legacy and memory alive within the story. As the credits roll on his story, we remember Paul Walker as more than a star on the screen. He was a man whose heart and passion extended far beyond the world of Hollywood.